You were 5 years old when you first learned that love was conditional. Maybe it was the way your parents' face lit up when you brought home perfect grades, but turned cold when you cried. Maybe it was how they bragged about your achievements to strangers while dismissing your feelings at home. Maybe it was the way they made everything about them, even your birthday parties, your scraped knees, your first heartbreak. And somewhere in your developing mind, a devastating equation formed. I am only valuable when I make them look good. I am only safe when I disappear. This is how the child of a narcissist learns to survive. Not by being themselves, but by becoming whatever their parent needs them to be. A trophy, a mirror, an extension of someone else's ego. And the cost of that survival is nothing less than your authentic self. Growing up with a narcissistic parent isn't just difficult. It's a specific kind of psychological warfare that happens so subtly, so consistently, that you don't even realize you're under attack. Because narcissistic parents don't just neglect their children, they consume them. They turn their children into sources of what psychologists call narcissistic supply, validation, admiration, control, the feeling of being special, important, superior. And children, desperate for love and approval, will sacrifice anything to provide it, even themselves. Let's start with what this actually looks like in daily life. Your emotions were either ignored or weaponized. When you were happy, they took credit. When you were sad, they made it about how your sadness affected them. When you succeeded, they basked in reflected glory. When you failed, they acted like your failure was a personal attack on their reputation. You learned that your feelings were inconvenient, your needs were selfish, and your worth was entirely dependent on how well you served their image. You became hypervigilant, constantly scanning their mood to predict the emotional weather of your home. You learned to read micro-expressions, voice tones, body language, because your safety depended on it. You developed what psychologists call a false self, a carefully constructed persona designed to earn love and avoid punishment. The real you, the one with authentic feelings, needs, and desires, went into hiding so deep that you forgot they even existed. This is the invisible trauma of growing up with a narcissistic parent. It's not just what they did to you, it's what they prevented you from becoming. Because when a child's primary job is to regulate an adult's emotions and feed their ego, that child never learns who they actually are. They learn who they need to be to survive, and that survival strategy becomes their prison. As you grew older, the patterns became more sophisticated, but no less damaging. Maybe they triangulated you against your siblings, creating competition for their limited affection. Maybe they parentified you, making them their emotional confidant or therapist. Maybe they alternated between love-bombing you with excessive praise and devaluing you with criticism, keeping you constantly off balance, always trying to earn back their approval. You might have been the golden child, held up as perfect, but never allowed to be human. Or you might have been the scapegoat, blamed for everything wrong in the family system. Either way, you weren't seen as a separate person with your own inner world. You were a character in their story, and your role was to make them look good. The most insidious part is how they convinced you that this was normal, that their explosive anger was your fault, that their emotional needs were more important than yours, that questioning them was disrespectful, ungrateful, proof that you were the problem. They gaslighted you so consistently that you learned to gaslight yourself. You became your own worst critic, your own harshest judge, because their voice became the voice in your head. And here's what nobody tells you about growing up this way. The effects don't end when you leave home. They follow you into every relationship, every moment of self-doubt. Because when your earliest template for love was conditional, manipulative, and self-serving, that becomes your blueprint for all future connections. You might find yourself attracted to partners who are emotionally unavailable, because unavailable love feels familiar. You might overfunction in relationships, constantly trying to earn affection through performance. You might struggle with boundaries because you never learned that you had the right to say no. You might feel guilty for having needs, ashamed of taking up space, terrified of being seen as selfish. Or you might swing the other way, becoming hyper-independent, pushing people away before they can hurt you, never fully trusting that someone could love you without an agenda. You might feel like an imposter in your own life, waiting for someone to discover that you're not as special, smart, or worthy as you pretend to be. Because deep down, you still believe that love must be earned, that your value is performance-based, that the real you is somehow fundamentally flawed. This is the legacy of narcissistic parenting. It's not just the memories of what happened, it's the way it rewired your nervous system, your attachment style, your core beliefs about yourself and others. It's the way it taught you that your feelings don't matter, your needs are burdens, and your worth is always in question. But here's what I want you to understand. None of this was your fault. You were a child trying to survive in an impossible situation. You adapted brilliantly to a toxic environment. The hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the self-abandonment, these weren't character flaws. They were survival strategies. And they worked. They kept you safe in a situation where being authentic was dangerous. The problem is that what saved you then is limiting you now. The child who learned to disappear is still disappearing in adult relationships. The child who learned that love was conditional is still jumping through hoops for approval. The child who learned to prioritize everyone else's needs is still neglecting their own. Recovery from narcissistic abuse isn't just about understanding what happened. It's about reparenting yourself. It's about learning to give yourself what your parent never could: unconditional acceptance, emotional safety, the right to have feelings, needs, and boundaries, the permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to take up space in the world. This process is often called inner child work, and it's both beautiful and brutal, because it means feeling all the grief you never had permission to feel, the sadness of never being truly seen, the anger at having your childhood stolen, the rage at being used as a prop in someone else's drama, the deep aching loneliness of growing up emotionally alone even when you weren't physically alone. You have to mourn the parent you needed but never had. You have to grieve the childhood that was sacrificed to someone else's ego. You have to feel the full weight of what was taken from you before you can begin to reclaim it. But here's the miracle of this work. As you begin to see and validate your own experience, as you start to trust your own perceptions and honor your own feelings, something extraordinary happens. The real you, the one who went into hiding all those years ago, begins to emerge, tentatively at first, like a flower pushing through concrete, but with time and patience and fierce self-compassion. That authentic self grows stronger. You start to recognize that your feelings are valid, even when others disagree. You begin to set boundaries, even when it makes people uncomfortable. You learn to ask for what you need, even when it feels terrifying. You discover that you can be loved for who you are, not just for what you do. This is the journey from survival to authenticity, from performing to being, from earning love to receiving it. It's not easy, and it's not quick. There will be setbacks, moments when you fall back into old patterns, times when the voice of your narcissistic parent feels louder than your own inner wisdom. But every time you choose yourself over their programming, every time you honor your truth over their narrative, every time you show up authentically instead of performing perfectly, you're healing not just yourself, but breaking the cycle for future generations. You are not responsible for your parents' emotional needs. You are not required to be their source of validation. You are not obligated to make them look good or feel important. You are a separate person with your own inner world, your own dreams,
your own right to exist exactly as you are. The child who learned to disappear deserves to be seen. The child who learned to perform deserves to be loved for who they are. The child who learned that their needs didn't matter deserves those needs met, starting with meeting them yourself. Your childhood may have been stolen, but your future is still yours to write, and this time you get to be the author of your own story. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating content that validates and heals the experiences so many of us share. You're not alone in this journey, and together we're rewriting the narrative of what it means to truly come home to ourselves.